And we're back once again, only on It's Last Call. Last Call of the Alcohol, only on the Last Call Podcast.com. And once again, joining me as always from Arrowhead Addict. This man here worked more hours than the entire federal government combined. He was busy breaking down draft prospects, doing mock drafts, pitching hope and patience to the Chiefs fans, and even talking about flags. When people were like, oh my God, I forgot to draft Caleb Proctor at number 9. What's going on? And he's now just he took a day off. He's working on a little vegetable project, which we'll get into later on. And he's now working on the Chiefs 2026 season, 2027 mock draft. This man never sleeps. I give you podcaster, columnist, scout extraordinaire. I give you Price Carter. So, Price, let's jump right into this here. And, okay, I admit it. I can't. I will not want to play poker with Brett Veach because he had us going one way and another way, and we didn't see this coming. So let's talk about it. When you look at this draft and you look at the trade up, how much do you give him credit for? We didn't see it. He fooled everybody in terms of who he really wanted, and he got his man in the end.
Yeah, this draft was really all about tendency breakers. The last couple of years, I have been pretty accurate in my final predictive mock for the Chiefs. Gotten several players right, even more positions correct at slot. And this year was all about tendency breakers. This is the highest they've ever drafted a cornerback after only they've drafted now, including Kennedy and Delane, they've drafted 15 corners under Brett Veach. Um, 13 of those corners were drafted on day three. One of them was on day two, Noel Williams, and two now on day one with Trent McDuffie and now Mansor Delane. They did not draft a single 30 visit that they had in, which they have historically always drafted a 30 visit. They did, R. Mason Thomas is a total different type of player than they've drafted in before. This is the highest they've drafted a running back since Clyde Edwards-Helaire back in 2020 or in 2020, and this is also the first quarterback that they've drafted since Patrick Mahomes. So a lot of tendency breakers, but I think when you get up in that top 10, I think the need for cloak and dagger is probably a little bit more important because those picks are so highly sought after, those picks are so highly discussed, and you really can kind of like, okay, we know this team is going here, we know this team is doing this team's either going here or here. So the secrecy was needed, and I think especially whenever you look at the drop off after Delane, where Chris Johnson goes in the very late 20s, early 30s, if I remember right, and then there was a chasm there at corner. I think the next corner off the board was Traden Stukes, who's 25 years old and a player who's probably a big nickel, not quite a true boundary corner. And seeing what happened with Jermod McCoy, it was very clear that they were committed to getting a very sure thing at the top of the draft, and I think they were able to do that. The move up was surprising. It makes sense because you're not only fending off the Commanders and the Saints, who both could have been a threat to take Delane, but also you're fending off who's behind you too. The Cowboys could have been a threat to take Delane if they wanted to, and instead they go get their guy, and it sounds like they absolutely loved him. And I think it also was interesting just listening to them talk post draft about the players that they had bucketed. It was pretty clear to me that they had Bailey and Reese as their top players on their board, and then Delane was probably three or four. I don't know how they felt about Carnell Tate, but there was no mention of Ruben Bain, which was a surprise to me because I thought he was a player who would have checked a lot of boxes for them as a prospect. But they went and got their guy, and the secrecy and stuff, it really paid off for them.
Is this a draft that you can look and go, this is more not just for the now, but also for the future? Because when I look at these picks, it's sort of like they're also for life. We have to say this. This is for life after Reed and Spags because they also are on a shorter window. They could leave after 2029, and a lot of these players will still be here, hopefully. So, is this more about Brett Veach's vision for life after Reed and whoever the new coach is? And I have players that if he decides, hey, I want to keep a cornerback more than 5 years, I have a good cornerback that he can keep for more than 5 years.
I think that this draft was in some ways, I think it was leaning more into what they have in place on offense with Reed and company. To me, like if we could zoom out at the macro level, I think this draft and this whole free agency process told us The running game was a massive problem. They took many steps to address it. We believe that with better coaching, better scheme, and better health, the offense will dramatically improve from what it was. It's tough too because they were a French top 10 offense before all the injuries hit the team late in the year with Mahomes and Rice left and they were I mean they were it was borderline a tank job there at the end of the year for them. But they attacked those parts and then to summarize, it was X's and O's on the offense, and it was Jimmy's and Joe's on the defense. And they lost a lot of Jimmy's and Joe's with Watson and McDuffie and Chanel, and even just ditch diggers, whether it be Derek Nottie or Mike Pennell, like those guys are gone too. And I think that they really were committed to turning over the defensive roster. So they're making a bet on Andy and Pat and the offensive end structure. I also throw out the hiring of Chad O'Shea, who is a very accomplished wide receiver coach and was a former assistant offensive coordinator with the Browns. Um, it There was not much highly spoken about Connor Embry, the former Chiefs wide receiver coach. So I think that they're really hoping to get more out of the guys that they have on the roster, which they spent a second round pick, a first round pick on Rashee Rice. They are on Xavier Worthy. They bring Tyquan Thornton back. They obviously give big money to Kenneth Walker, and they've turned over that running back room quite a bit too by bringing in DeMarcado, who profiles as a third down back, a guy who brings a lot more juice than they had back there last year.
So with this all these picks, when you look at Brett Veach, do you give him a lot more credit than the last couple of years in terms of, as you said, he fooled everybody. No 30 visit guys in his top, four picks. There, we no, didn't get any leaks. Like usually, you get leaks like right off the bat. Okay, we're gonna take this guy. We're gonna take that guy. Hey, they really love this guy. Like when you look at this, how much should Chiefs fans appreciate that? Damn, Brett Veach worked all of us. I mean, he pulled the wool over our eyes and took basically took our money out of our wallets, and we didn't even see it coming.
Yeah, I think the most clear, obvious smokescreen was everything around the tackles. I think a lot of it's tough to tell because when you hear early smoke and see these mock drafts from people who really know what they're doing, some of the top people in the league, I mean, it was like Spencer Fano, Spencer Fano, Spencer Fano, more Spencer Fano, and it felt like one of the top reasons was is that Andy's friends with the Utah coach. Like that, it was just very strange, like the reasoning there. And obviously, like there is a reason to consider tackle as a need for this team. Obviously, Jalen Moore is slotted to be the right tackle. They move on from Jawan Taylor. Josh Simmons had since from the team, which never really got a ton of explanation. I mean, the tackle depth, even with liking some of what they saw from Issa Pole as a UDFA towards the back end of the year, who got significant playing time once those guys went down with injury. The need for tackle, it was real. And I do think that, going into next year, right tackle's a big need. And it's a very small needle to thread where Jalen Moore plays well enough that you want to bring him back, and he doesn't play too well where he gets big money because they don't have that big money to hand out. So that was the clear and obvious smokescreen. But Chiefs fans were beside themselves because it's just like, how much do you need to invest in this offensive line? Where you have a second round pick at guard who really developed well this year in Kingsley Suamataia, one of the best centers in the game, who's paid at the top of the market. They just paid top market guard money for Trey Smith, and Josh Simmons, when he was on the field, looked really, really good. So it's like, and don't forget, like Jalen Moore's making $15 million this year too, so he's not a nobody. So it was like, my Lord, how much are they going to pour into this offensive line? And it made sense in that part of the draft too, where there wasn't really just this consensus. There wasn't a Joe Alt, there wasn't a Penei Sewell type of tackle prospect that was going to go in the top five. So it behooved them to have that deception, also because I think at the back end of the first, I think the Patriots jumped the Chiefs for Caleb Lomu, and they didn't need to. Like I don't think the Chiefs were a threat to take Lomu. They go get Peter Woods, who that was a guy that wasn't really on my radar for the Chiefs. Again, picking up the breadcrumbs of they didn't do a 30 visit with them, but it makes all the sense in the world, especially because he was, I think Caleb Banks was a little bit overdrafted, just knowing some of the injury concerns, and also the flashes are brilliant from Caleb Banks, but a full game of Caleb Banks tape, you walk away wanting a lot more than what you get from the there. they get the top penetrating three tech in the class. And Caleb Banks, there's or in Peter Woods. I think there's an argument to be made that the Chiefs got the two best players at their positions with Delane and Peter Woods. There was not a lot of those guys in this class. You go on down the board, like a Grayson Holton or someone like that. Like those were the next like kind of penetrating three techs. There wasn't a lot of those guys available. There were quite a few more two-gapping run stuffers. The Chiefs addressed that with Kyrus Tonga, and also they don't do that a lot on the defensive line. They're more about getting uphill. So they maneuvered the board well. There's some Chiefs fans that still think that they could have gotten Delane at 9. We'll never know. I'm not going to sit here and say yes they could have because you just don't know. Is it possible? Sure. And I think if we're doing hindsight in a couple of years, and if Caleb Downs becomes the player that a lot of people think he could become, that might be the name where it's like, okay, they could have stick and picked uh, him at 9, Caleb Downs, and even if Delane was gone. And to be fair, they did give up 3 picks for one player. And they certainly could have used pick 74 in this draft. But at the end of the day, I feel like they wanted a really sure thing, and Delane was probably one of the more safer evals in this class.
So that brings us to Mansor Delane. On paper, as you said, this feels like a safe pick. He's a Missouri native. He's coming home. He's an SEC, first team All-American cornerback. He checks off the boxes, relentless, intelligent, physical, smart. He's athletic enough for the position. You said on several occasions you mentioned with Delane, but it's the safe pick. How much for Brett Veach was this sort of a key? And like, all right, I want a guy I know who can play day one, who's not going to be a bust, who I don't have to coach up too much, but I know just by, looking at everything at the tape, I feel comfortable he is an NFL starting player.
Yeah, I certainly think that that was a big part of it is getting the best pure outside cover corner in the game in college football this year. And Delane was excellent. He's one of those guys that I think you look at not just what he put on tape this year, but also the context of like what LSU season was, which was a major disappointment. And he still played at a really high level throughout the whole year. And yeah, I think this was also the type of like this is something that I talked about during the draft cycle. If you go look historically at top 10 picks at corner, we're all thinking of Jeff Okudah from Ohio State, but in the last 10 years, those players have been really, really safe. I mean, you might not love J.C. Horn, who was another top 10 pick, but between Gardner, Stingley, J.C. Horn, the list goes on and on, and none of them have just turned it into flat out bust. Besides Akuda, which at the point that he was brought into the Lions organization, they were not a very stable organization, and injuries zapped him a lot of what he was as a player too. So I think that that's what they were going for, and that freed them up in the back end of the first, and also free them up in the second round to take some players I think were bigger swings, some more upside swings. I like my comp for Delane is Denzel Ward. I think that he could be that type of player. I think that Mansour Delane has the ability to be a top 2 or 3 corner in the game. Sure, his tape is good enough to do that. He's certainly got traits and tools. I think the more likely outcome is he's a guy that never gets mentioned in that top corner conversation, that top 2 or 3 conversation, but is never left out of the top 10, like a Denzel Ward, who is just, a consistently very good player. And he physically isn't the most imposing, like specimen. Like he's not overly long, he's not overly big, but so technically sound, never panics, good in zone, good in man, good at press, supports the run well, good ball production. I think, the only way that this really falls apart for the Chiefs with Delane is if he can't find the field because of injuries. Obviously, the caveat of like if he's just bad, that's a problem. But I really see this as a high level fit and a high level need. And look, the Chiefs historically have been very good at developing corners. That's some Chiefs fans' frustration with them taking a corner there is like, oh, well, you can just go get a guy on day 2 and day 3 and turn them into good players. That's what you've been doing. But also, the best corner the Chiefs have had is Trent McDuffie, and that was a guy who they viewed as a first round talent, and they got at 21. And that class also had a Sauce Gardner, also had Derek Stingley. So McDuffie was corner three in that class. I think that Delane's got higher ceiling than McDuffie did simply because he's a little bit longer, and his ability to stay on the outside, I think, is higher. So I think that they wouldn't, got a Trent McDuffie replacement. And some people might quibble with the process of like, okay, you paid Trey Smith, you pay, then you trade Trent McDuffie, and then with part of the draft capital that you have, factoring in pick 29 and everything, you use that to go replace Trent McDuffie. What's the process there? The only thing I'll say about that is paying cornerbacks top contract money usually isn't a high successful process. I mean, Patrick Surtain's probably the best example right now of a guy who's, a top paid cornerback, and honestly, he's a bargain at the deal he's at right now, and I wouldn't be surprised if he got a new deal soon. But a lot of those other guys, like, how's that Sauce Gardner deal looking for the Colts and the Jets, right? Like the Jets had to eat money to get more draft picks from them. I think, Stingley, he took kind of a weird deal where like he's actually going to be up pretty soon. And McDuffie wanted to be paid as the top corner. And frankly, he's not a top outside corner. He's a top slot corner, but he gets top of the market money. And I don't know if the Chiefs were ever going to do that.
So the one I guess complaint people had was why not Ruben Bain? Why not Ruben Bain? I mean, and I get it. I was one of those guys who's like, wait a minute, taking a cornerback. And at first, I was freaking out. I've since come along because I realized sort of, well, look, Delane is a surefire player. How is he going to handle all this? Because in some ways, he's in a no-win situation. It's like, all right, yes, you're replacing Trent McDuffie, who you could argue was the most beloved defensive back this team's had since Albert Lewis. That you're replacing a guy who was everything you wanted in a player and then some. And oh, by the way, we really wanted our heart set in a pass rush guy. Instead, we got you. Like for Delane, how much pressure is there on him to really live up right away, or else Chiefs fans are going to look and go, "We could have had Ruben Bain, but we got another cornerback."
Yeah, Ruben Bain was definitely the name that a lot of people, and when they traded up to pick six, in the moment we were talking on our stream of just like who is this for, and my thought was either Bain or Tyson, just looking at the teams ahead of him because again we hadn't really connected the Chiefs to Delane. I think for him, like the Chiefs did a really nice job with some of their media stuff. Like they followed him around for the first 24 hours after he got drafted. He's an impressive kid, very well spoken, carries himself very well. Like I think for him, like the best thing that he can do is just come in from day one and like just be an unquestioned starter. And a guy that's, he's a rookie. He's going to have some up and downs. If you're expecting perfection from him, you're going to be disappointed. But if he can, keep his nose clean and be a consistent starting presence that grows into a Pro Bowl, All Pro caliber player on the outside, I don't think it'll take long for Chiefs fans to get on board with this kid because, like I said, I think that there's a lot more to Delane than just the on the field stuff. He seems like a real sharp kid. Seems like he's got his head on right. And something that's notable for the Chiefs here is that for a first time in a long time, I think they steered clear of any sort of character flag in the draft. Which there was some of that with Ruben Bain, and there also was the arms that. I don't think anybody expected Bain to fall to 15, and he did. So, all those things being said, I think that it made sense. I think that they might not have viewed the gap as large as some did between Bain and the next wave of pass rushers that came off the board. And if you look at it, there were several guys who went after Bain before R. Mason Thomas, but that might not be how the Chiefs had it lined up on their board, or they might have been okay with the fact that like we'll get in on edge rusher at round two because we think that that group of guys is pretty solid, pretty comparable to what Bain was.
All right, so this is the one that you and I had questions about leading up to the draft in terms of what the hell happened. All the other people also had questions of what the hell happened. Peter Woods picked 29, and look, shout out to him. Him and his family were well color coordinated for the whole
Yeah.
draft thing. I gotta say that. Year ago, he's 330 and he's playing like a monster. We're going, oh, top five pick. Chiefs will never get this guy. Year later, he falls 29. He loses weight of all things. And yet he slid and he didn't play well. What the hell happened? And if you're a Chiefs, how much do you just look at that tape and somebody go, okay, well, Clemson just entirely imploded. It can't get that bad in 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, at this point last year, he was considered a top 10 pick by most folks. And whenever the Chiefs drafted him the next morning, I got up and took a look at the 2024 tape for Woods because I just did 2025, and the usage is notably different. And I mean, he's a guy that he's an interesting body type. I think his draft process, you compare him and TJ Parker, which obviously they played next to each other at Clemson. Both of them were a part of a team that really crumbled, that really lost its way. And whether it be them or Terrell or even on the other side of the ball, Antonio Williams, like that whole Clemson team had some questions to answer about what happened down the stretch here. I think for Peter Woods, I think he was probably the person who was impacted the most by the scheme changes on defense. They changed defensive coordinators in 2024. It was not uncommon to find him as a five tech outside the tackle, and he was okay there. His best reps certainly come at three technique when he's asked to penetrate, both as a run stopper and like the pass rush flashes are there. And if he's one of those guys that if he can learn to finish a little bit better, whether it be that last step to the quarterback or wrapping up the ball carrier or something like that, his flashes go from like, okay, there it is, another year like this, and he could be a fringe top 10 pick to what happened this past year, where it just didn't seem like him and the coaching staff were on the same page about what they wanted his role to be. Or he did lose weight, and he came into the combine sub 300 pounds. And then his role that he was asked to play at Clemson was more of a two-gapper, more of a pure nose tackle, more of a space eater. That's not his game, and that's not his superpower. So I think the Chiefs looked at this and said, like, he's going to fit what we're doing better than what he was doing at Clemson. To me, he has the highest ceiling of any pick the Chiefs take. Few players can move and be as quick and as explosive as Peter Woods can be. He has the traits, he has the tools to be an all-pro, to be, I'm not going to say the next Chris Jones because that's a Hall of Famer, but to be a guy that you can start building your pass rush around. And I think the Chiefs quietly have turned over their interior defensive line. I would love for them to get one more just kind of solid body in there, but you get Tonga, who is a far, far, far upgrade over Derek Nottie, Jerry Tillery, and Mike Pennell. And then you've got Omar Norman Lott, who is a guy who actually physically is pretty similar to Peter Woods coming out. If they can get Omar Norman Lott back to the guy he was at Tennessee, which obviously he's coming off an ACL injury, but even before he was kind of playing more of a nose tackle-esque role. You turn that interior defensive line pass rush into a real strength with Woods, Omar Norman Lott, Jones, and Tonga. That is probably the most upgraded room on the Chiefs roster besides running back. So I at first I had some pause about Woods just because I hadn't looked at the 2024 tape and didn't know the full context. I understand what they did here, and seeing the full scope of the draft, it was interesting because I think one of the things that they're really looking at is we want to start winning in multiple ways on the pass rush. You look at like what the Seahawks did, and not just the Seahawks, some other teams too. Their pass rush is as much about bodies as it is a winner. Yeah, it's great to have Myles Garrett, but what if you have five or six guys that can get to the passer in different ways? Whether you've got your stand-up fast guys or your guys who are hands in the dirt, heavy-handed, like a Tank Lawrence for Seattle. And the Chiefs, they brought that to this defensive line, and I think that they added a lot of depth and a lot of ceiling to their pass rush.
Does this move also allow them to tinker with more Chris Jones at edge? More, hey, you know what? If we want to go small but still big, Gilliott, Karloftis, Woods, Jones, and you're not going, oh crap, well, we have a linebacker on there. I mean, does this sort of like, placate, Spags in terms of I can maybe even use Jones or Woods at edge if I want a bigger edge and not have to worry about giving up size?
Yeah, I certainly think so. Like, I think we've always kind of talked about the NASCAR package for Spags and how he likes to get the best pass rushers up there. And yeah, like Jones still lines up on the edge and wins there. It was 2021 that they tried him like almost as a full-time edge. I definitely want to see Chris Jones on the inside winning the most. Like that's where he's at his best, and that's where he's become a Hall of Famer. They gotta, I think one of the other things too is like there's a way where you make Chris Jones and George Karl better players, not only by freeing them up by having better players beside them, but also just having more depth and not having them play so many snaps. Both guys play a ton of snaps, upwards of 70 to 80% of the snaps. That's a lot for a 31-year-old Chris Jones. I would like to see that number closer to 60 to 65%. And then like, okay, we're getting a fresh Chris Jones on third down here. And again, part of what will help that too is if you have a guy who can generate pass rush or be a factor in the run game like Tonga, to free up those guys. And I think they did a good job of bringing lots of different mixtures. I think the edge room could definitely still use an addition, whether that be a Cam Jordan or someone like that who's just a veteran who can kind of raise the floor of that room overall. But they're close, and I do think that they've brought themselves a lot of flexibility.
Our Mason Thomas was the second round pick. He is the edge, and this is a guy, as if you had said, our Mason Thomas, the Kansas City Chiefs. I remember even talking to you before the draft, and you're like, yeah, that's not happening. Him, Cassius House, stop mocking these guys to the Chiefs. It's not happening. It happens. So either Spags is really getting a little bit creative here and is trying something outside of his zone, or I don't know, maybe they envision our Mason Thomas as a linebacker. Either way, I love it, but again, as you said, this is against the grain for the Chiefs.
Yeah, yeah, this one really caught me off guard. At first I was pretty hesitant because I was concerned that he wasn't going to get on the field. That he's a guy that doesn't fit what they like to do. We had seen the Chiefs prototype of edge rusher. This is something that's been happening for a while here. Sonadike Uzama was kind of a size outlier. That pick didn't work, but I'm not sure his size was the reason why, as much as it was other things. Ashton Gelati, while he plays like his Spagnuolo defensive end, his measurables aren't really Spagnuolo-esque. He's much shorter armed, sawed off, a little bit undersized. So they fully lean into this with our Mason Thomas here. And we had heard that the Chiefs had been sniffing around the edge rusher from the Seahawks, who's escaping my name. He just signed with the Bengals, but they'd been sniffing around him too at the trade deadline this past year. So it's clear that they do desire to have speed off the edge. I think our Mason Thomas brings enough against the run that like he's just not going to be a total liability. But this is a guy who does have power to his game, but does still have speed and bend and plays the way that he plays with a certain violence and physicality. He loves to mix it in the run game, and he's got a high motor that never stops. And the Chiefs have had an affinity for the Oklahoma program for quite some time, whether it be Creed Humphrey, Hollywood Brown, Orlando Brown, R. Mason Thomas. They hired DeMarco Murray. Like they have an affinity. Wanya Morris. Like they have liked the Oklahoma program for quite some time here. So this was a guy that was not on my radar. I applaud them for doing it. And I appreciate the desire to get a guy who can win in 3.5 seconds. But now it's time. Like, this is the one to me that can really swing this class. If he becomes a guy who can consistently get, close to double digit sacks and be a real weapon on third down, then more power to him. But we can't be talking in week 16 that he played 8 snaps. And he can't be a guy who's lining up off ball. I know that the Chiefs need some help off ball, linebacker wise. I mean, they still haven't really replaced Leo Chanel. It's still Tranquil and Bolton, but that's not what he did, and that's not what he's been asked to do at Oklahoma. He is best with his hand in the dirt or standing up and roaring off that edge. And this is a guy, you think about the Chiefs have the Bengals on the schedule this year, a big heavy-footed tackle like Orlando Brown. This is the type of guy that is a nightmare matchup for those type of players. So he's got to come in and play. Like this is the one that's going to be like, all right, show me, let me see it.
Could he be a Leo Chanel? Maybe not, again, the same role, but in terms of like he is an outside linebacker, Spag starts, tinkering a little more like, sort of what the Jaguars did with Jason Allen, who they'll line up as an edge, but he also occasionally he'll drop into coverage. Like when you look at our Mason Thomas, and as I said, you don't want to just get like 6 snaps. Could Spags sort of meet halfway in the middle? Like, all right, we're gonna have you as a once in a while drop into coverage, but I want you as an off-ball linebacker who I can move around, go up the middle, around the tackle, through the guards, just basically cause havoc.
I'm not going to say he can't do it. I'll just say he wasn't asked to do much of that at Oklahoma. Like he was a pure edge rusher. No, I mean he can spot drop into coverage, but I mean shoot, they've had Ashton Gelati got an interception this year doing that. Like they ask that of players, whether it be simulator pressures or blitzes or things like that. But it would be turn for him. I think he could, speaking to his versatility, his athleticism does lend himself to do some things that might be a little bit more unique than like a Zion Young or a TJ Parker, some guys who are more kind of traditional Spags threshold guys. But hey, they had Zion Young on the board and they chose our Mason Thomas. So that speaks a little bit to what they thought of this guy and what the vision is for him.
All right, they with their fourth round pick, they took another cornerback, and I know some people are like, oh, why are we taking another cornerback? They need to get people. Jadon Kennedy is a guy who I hear is the nickel. That he, if in a perfect world, he will step in and be the nickel cornerback for the Chiefs. Should Chiefs fans like this guy? Is he worth it? I mean, we really didn't hear much about him leading up to the draft. So talk us into why Jadon Kennedy is a perfect Chiefs cornerback.
I think this is one of those like situations where you might be making more than one player better on your roster. The projected slot cornerback is Cater Kohu for the Chiefs right now, former Miami Dolphin coming off an ACL injury. He was a good player. I'm not going to call him great, but he was a quality starter that could eat reps there. I think that Kennedy will come in and compete with him, and I think there's a chance that he wins that job ultimately. Knowing the fact that the Chiefs are going to want him to win that job and have long-term option there. And to me, you're making Shamari Connor a better player now because the Chiefs' infatuation, insistence, persistence on playing Shamari Connor in the slot has been a major problem. And you can go pull it up in StatHead or wherever. Like when Shamari Connor is targeted out of the slot, he is brutal. He just does not have the athleticism or the coverage ability to be able to do that. He's better going down. He's better, when things are in front of him, rather trying to run man on man. And Kennedy brings a sticky coverage. I mean, he's the only player in college football this year who allowed less receptions than Mansor Delane. He's a little bit interesting. I think the NFL, like nothing is more hotter and trendier right now in the NFL than big nickels and white tight ends. And a lot of teams are going towards that Nick Manwari, that guy that allows you to play dime all the time out of the slot, that's athletic enough to cover, but big enough to support the run. That's not Kennedy, right? He's undersized. But the 22, it does remind you of Trent McDuffie in the slot and what he was able to bring. I don't think he's as much of a run defender and a tackler as McDuffie was. I mean, he's not poor in that area, but that's not a strength of his like it was for McDuffie. But I think that they wanted to go get a guy who's a pure slot cover corner. And that's very, very important in the NFL. We know that some of the best wide receivers in the league line up out of the slot, and this allowed them to play Shamari Connor at safety, give them a long-term option to compete with Cater Kohu. And like, let's be real, like something that I try to remind people too is that player progression, it's not necessarily linear. We all think that Noel Williams can take another step. We all hope that what we saw from Christian Fulton at the back half of the year when he finally got on the field will be the guy that they get for 17 games. Well, Christian Fulton's never played 17 games, and Noel Williams might not take the next step. And yeah, Mansor Delane, we love him. We think he's a safe prospect, but there's no sure things in the NFL. So getting another guy who provides some flexibility out of the slot, he could daylight as a box safety as well too, or something like that. This just gives them another body type that they can use and gives them more insurance. So if Christian Fulton gets hurt, if Noel Williams doesn't take the next step, they've got options. So it made sense. Kennedy was a guy that I was a little surprised at how early he went, but this is the pick for me where it's like, man, I don't know if I would have preferred Chandler Rivers out of Duke, who had a little bit more ball production, plays a little bit more with his hair on fire, or Keontae Scott, who, is an extremely fun player. It's one of my favorite players in the class. But Keontae Scott's only been good for 1 year, and it was his age 25 season on a Miami defense that had a couple of first round picks this year, probably going to have a couple more next year. Like, yeah, I think that there's putting the pieces together of why it makes sense they went this direction.
All right. This is your guy. I saw you celebrating when they drafted him. I know that you are already talking to professional eaters about eating 10, is it 10 ears of corn? You are a Nebraska graduate. This guy here, I'm guessing you broke out the jersey and proudly are wearing it around. Go, yes, Emmett Johnson is a Chief. All is well. Andy, I forgive you for last season. So tell us why you love this guy. Because again, I know you love this guy. There's a lot of people who were loving this pick, including like there's even like John Frischello's going, hey, one of the best fifth round picks, but one of the best day three picks in the NFL draft. So why is he a fit, and why should Chiefs fans not look and go, oh my God, it's Cedric Edwards-Helaire all over again? No.
Well, I think you look at what Emmett Johnson was able to do this year. Nebraska, like he was the catalyst for their offense. They didn't really have a skill player that threatened in any way. I mean, they had role players like Isaiah Hunter, Ja'Cory Barney, Dane Key, but they didn't really have a guy who moves the needle besides Emmett Johnson. And I think what you really like about Emmett too is he was asked to do quite a bit in that Nebraska offense. They run a kind of a air it's an interesting offense where it has a lot of kind of traditional ground and pound elements with quite a bit under center, but then they run a lot of air raid concepts with Dana Holgerson, who was the former Houston coach, who's now the offensive coordinator. And Emmett Johnson has one of the best passing profiles of any back in this class. I would argue the best. Not just what he was asked to do as a ball catcher, but also a route runner. It was not uncommon to see them come out and shotgun and then they motion him out and he's running a real route, not just a swing route or something like that. And, Texas routes or shallow cross or mesh, like he did a lot there and he was a factor in the screen game. And then, he did a lot as far as a pure runner too. The most productive back in FBS, more than Quan Lacey or Ahmed Hardy or Jeremiah Love or any of these guys who are, first round picks this year and potential first round picks next year. He led the nation in missed tackles forced. He was highly productive in a very competitive league for a team that didn't have much on offense. The offensive line is emerging for Nebraska. They've got some guys, but it's not achieved. I mean, they fired Dominic Raiola Dillon's uncle. That he was the offensive line coach at Nebraska. So I think when you look at Emmett Johnson, you're looking at a guy who is going to create a lot of missed tackles more because he's shifty. He's got good vision. He's not going to, power through guys. I know some people have wanted to compare him to like a Kareem Hunt or something like that. He's not a powerful back. Like he's going to go down on first contact more than not. I think this guy is going to specialize in 10, 15-yard chunk gains. I know the testing for him was adequate, not excellent, but he was also like probably one of the 4 or 5 guys at the NFL Combine who did everything. He did every single test. He went out there and competed. He is, I think his on-field athleticism is better than what he might have showed at the Combine. So I just think that this is a guy who is going to come in and be a really good early down back for the Chiefs. I mean, if Kenneth Walker goes down, which is something that he's struggled with at times, this is a guy who can step into that role and you feel really comfortable about. He was my running back 3 in this class. I was very excited to see him there. And yeah, I mean, I think this is a guy who's going to become a fan favorite very quickly, simply because he profiles as a change of pace guy. He'll probably come in and compete with Imari DiMercato. If he can learn pass protection, I think he's a natural third down back long term for the team. And him and Kenneth Walker could be the next, kind of great running back tandem here in Kansas City. A massive upgrade for the room overall.
Is it safe to say that he might get more carries than we expect in the first couple weeks, especially with, I'll talk about Mahomes and just his injury and how they are going to be very safe. Like when you look at this pick, how much are they counting on him to be an immediate contributor? Maybe not, be the bell cow, but a guy like, all right, well, we don't want to just run Kenneth Walker into the ground, so let's give him 10, 15 carries if we decide to go really run heavy.
Yeah, I mean it's Andy. Like you're never gonna get the amount of games that you're getting 20 plus carries from a running back period. It's just not that much. I suspect that his role will probably grow more as the season goes on. I think his best role is going to be spelling Kenneth Walker, whereas replacing DiMercato. I think the running back room has got some interesting storylines to kind of work out, whether it be Emmett Johnson as a pass protector. Brashard Smith is right now more of an idea than he is a player, right? Like he's closer to Dexter McCluster or DeAnthony Thomas as a player right now than he is a running back. Um, I would suspect that Emmett Johnson will, certainly compete and hopefully beat out Brashard Smith as a running back and be the third running back. And yeah, I think that there's a path for him to be active on game day and be a factor. I think like most rookies, like they'll probably bring him on slow. But yeah, I depending on how committed the Chiefs are to spelling Kenneth Walker, because you could tell yourself one of two things. You can say the Seahawks were focused on keeping Kenneth Walker healthy and fresh for the stretch run, and that's why he had that surge that he did. Or did he have that surge because they finally stopped screwing around with Zach Charbonnet? And a lot of times in free agency, when you sign a player, you're saying, okay, well, we think that there's more here. We think that there's more from Kenneth Walker as a pass catcher, something he didn't do a ton of in Seattle, and maybe they just ride Kenneth Walker. But I think the difference is now is before, if Kenneth Walker went down, the running back room went from like a very good room to like kind of bad. And Emmett Johnson now is a real upgrade up there. My comp for him has been kind of Kyron Williams-esque or Devin Singletary back when he was, running for the Bills and a little bit younger. That's the type of player I think that they have here. And, those guys, they're not, no one's ever going to look at them and say, oh, that's a top 10 back in the league. But those are all guys who are NFL vets who, are role players on good offenses and good teams.
Well, finally in the fifth round, they drafted a wide receiver. Even though every mock said, "Oh, they got to take wide receiver." Wide receiver is a big need here. They got to get somebody. They went, nope, we're waiting or defense, running game, and then Cyrus Allen. We're taking in the fifth round, and nobody had this guy as a Chiefs on any of their mock drafts. I can guarantee you that. So again, so I ask, and he transferred to Cincinnati from Texas A&M. So is he good enough to make this roster? And was this one of your bigger surprise picks? We're like, okay, I did not have this on the bingo card for the Chiefs.
Yeah, I think, with the offense, like so much of the narrative during draft day, we're just like, man, they're kind of putting the offense on the back burner. I It was interesting that the way that they viewed on improving the run game was through running backs rather than like a lot of us wanted to see them make an improvement in the tight end room as blockers because Noah Gray is an undersized tight end, a former quarterback that, you know, profiles more as a pass catcher than a blocker. And obviously Kelsey, he's not known for his blocking. It's not they can't do it, but it's not his strength. They don't really have that guy. They don't really have a guy that is a block first guy. And they bring in Robert Tunyon. I mean, they just seem to be very okay with that third tight end being a journeyman, a guy who's not a difference maker, instead of trying to get someone who can bring a true white tight end set. But they go with Cyrus Allen, which I was kind of frustrated because like I think I evaluated like 18 or 19 wide receivers and he just missed the cut for me. But I tell you what, like this is a guy that I think a lot of Chiefs fans are going to really love when they go up to St. Joe and watch him in training camp. He moves differently than any wide receiver they have on the roster right now. His release package, his athleticism, his cuts in and out, like this is a guy who profiles as a guy who can beat man coverage. He's going to be a slot predominant player. But I think there's a real chance that he could come along as a wide receiver 3 or 4. Right now, the Chiefs wide receiver room, they kind of have real clear defined roles. You've got Tyquan Thornton, who's going to be a boundary guy that's going to stretch the vertical plane. You've got Rashee Rice, your power slot, and you've got Xavier Worthy, who does a little bit of everything, more of a gadget type role than a true outside threat. They kind of need this guy who can come in and beat man coverage. And Jalen Royals is, really an unknown at this point. Hopefully they can get something out of him this coming year. He was kind of a guy who could line up on the outside, did it quite a bit at Utah State, but needs to grow and needs some playing time too. But yeah, I mean Cyrus Allen, I mean, I think there's a real chance, like I said, he could be a different body type, different player, but could be the next Demarcus Robinson, could be the next Byron Pringle, which you talk about those guys, you're never going to be like, wow, those guys were superstars for the Chiefs. But you go watch a Chiefs playoff game highlights or something. Oh, there's Byron Pringle catching a touchdown. There's Demarcus Robinson moving the chains, and that's what this offense needs. It just needs answers, and preparing for life after Travis Kelce, and Rashee Rice has not done a lot to make you want to offer him a contract long term. This wide receiver room, it's got a lot of questions after this year. So I think this is a worthwhile swing at this point in the draft. Pick 74, we were talking about them trading Delane or trading up for Delane. That's pick 74 is one of those picks that it's like, man, that could have been maybe a Chris Bell or someone like that, a wide receiver that you could plan around more long term. But there's some traits there with Cyrus Allen that are certainly worth being invested in.
How much? Again, you mentioned safe. Like you look at Cyrus Allen. That's sort of his tape in the profile screen. Like there's no injury history. There's no off the field issues. There's no coaching issues. He's everything you sort of want in a football player. Like he makes good cuts. He has good hands. He's not great at anything, but he's very good, and he's not going to be a problem. Was that the big selling point? Where they're looking at this team, especially the wide receiver room, and going, We want adults. We don't want children who are going to, cause more problems. No more, guys who are getting in trouble with the law. We just want guys who have no drama. No drama wide receivers.
Yep. Yeah, I do think so. And I think that this is a guy who's, he does kind of factor into special teams a little bit too. He has some return experience. So I think one of the things too is like that this is a guy who can round out a roster and be a contributor in more than just as a wide receiver. So yeah, I think that they just looked at this as a guy who brings in a different skill set. Had some really nice touchdown production, obviously with Sorsby as his quarterback, and they also bring in his teammate Jeff Caldwell, who is an athlete, not much of a receiver at this point, but a guy who has a lot of tools.
With the final pick of Kansas City Chiefs 2026 draft, they take a quarterback. We did not have that here. And if I had said to you earlier this year, like, hey, yeah, Garrett Nussmeier is going to be a Kansas City Chief, you would have told me to stop taking, smoking, inhaling, or eating whatever I'm doing. Please, let come back to reality. But here we are, Garrett Nussmeier. A, fell to the seventh round, which I'm still trying to figure out how the hell that happened. And B, the Kansas City Chiefs selected him. So Chiefs fans shouldn't panic. We're not going to trade Patrick Mahomes and give the keys to Garrett Nussmeier. But does this also signal like, yeah, we can't keep going to the backup, Garrett Minshew, Chad Henne, Carson Wentz. We actually got to get somebody who's young and can play, and we don't have to pay $3 to $6 million for per year.
Yeah, I certainly think that that's the plan here is hoping to develop a backup quarterback, which has value. Most backups are making 5, 6, 7 million dollars. That's a market that they just continually are dipping into. Last year was kind of significant because it was the first quarterback that was younger than Mahomes with Gardner Minshew. Also bring up that no backup, like there's this perception around Andy Reid that he's just this quarterback whisperer and can just get the most out of everyone, which was great back when that was Nick Foles and some of those guys. But when was the last time a backup quarterback looked good in Kansas City? It was Chad Henne and then Matt Moore. And that Chad Henne legendary drive against the Jaguars in the 2022 playoff run featured a like 67-yard run from Isaiah Pacheco, which feels like a miracle at this point looking back. But I mean, there's just not been this track record of a backup quarterback having success in this offense. And I think, there was some stuff around his spine. He had a cyst on his spine. Obviously, LSU had a really rough season. Nussmeier plays away like, he's been described as like a Nepo baby at quarterback, and it kind of makes sense. Like he has some throws on tape. There's like, boy, he's letting him hang there. Like he will fit stuff in some tight window. He's a guy who plays the game. Like he knows he's a coach's kid whose job is safe. I mean, the traits aren't overwhelming for him. I mean, the arm strength is good. Like man can rip the hell out of a dig. Not super physically imposing. Not going to, not elite arm talent. But for him to be picked 249, that felt like value for any team that's going to take him. And if he can be the Chiefs' backup quarterback going forward long term, then it's a total great pick. And his upside, like if you're telling me what is the best outcome from Garrett Nussmeier, it's probably a Chase Daniel type of player, a guy who can bring something to the quarterback room as a former coach's kid, as a highly recruited prospect, and all those type of things as a backup. And that's probably the ceiling for him. Could he get us through two or three games if we needed to? Is he a guy that is kind of plucky in preseason? Like that's probably his ceiling. So I was certainly okay with that. I know some people are like, what? You spent a pick on a quarterback, but look, man, they traded a pick for Justin Fields this year, and I certainly think Fields will be the backup quarterback this year. But they might, if they want Nussmeier to be around long term, I think that he's going to have to make the 53 because I think if just him having the stink of Reed and Mahomes on him, if they put him on the practice squad, I think he'll get taken.
Could he be QB2 this year? I mean, when you
I
think of what Andy Reid wants in a quarterback, don't screw up, don't make, bad decisions, just spread the ball around. Like he's done this with Alex Smith. He's done this with AJ Feely, with Doug Peterson. Justin Fields isn't those guys. Justin Fields is like, hold on to your underwear and pray he doesn't do anything stupid, but he'll make a spectacular play. Like I know that they're hoping Mahomes plays week one, and Andy's going, yeah, we'll see. Let's not rush it here. Don't push him too hard because knowing Mahomes, he'll try to play through, broken knee. But Is there a world where Garrett Nussmeier is QB2 this year?
I don't see it. I think with Fields, like them giving up a pick for him and the floor that Fields bring as an athlete, like that's part of the reason why I was okay with them kind of going a different direction with Fields. Again, he's a younger prospect, a younger player than Mahomes at this point. Mahomes is now the vet in that room rather than having that guy who is kind of helping Mahomes. But like, look, Fields is what he is at this point. The only thing you can say about him is he's never really been in a spot that had good offensive infrastructure. Those Bears teams he was a part of were not. He's been with the Jets. I mean, he looked okay there for a minute with the Steelers, and then at the time, everyone's like, "Well, why is Mike Tomlin going to Russell Wilson?" That was kind of a controversial move, and then they move off of him. But I think his floor as an athlete, I think there's a chance that we see a little bit of Justin Fields in the red zone just because of his athleticism. I think that Fields will just kind of be the clear and away QB2 this year, and then next year will be the year like if they stay out of the backup quarterback market and it is Nussmeier, maybe they do have some faith in him to be the QB2.
So we talked about this in what all before the draft that the Chiefs offense feels like they're going back to real Andy Reid ball, which is we're going to run the ball a lot. I know we're not getting too crazy here, but they brought in Kenneth Walker. They've stuck with the offensive line. They brought in the Mario Emil DeMacario. They brought in now Emmett Johnson. Shadow Shea is the wide receivers coach. DeMarco Murray's the running backs coach. Like when you look at the offseason, how much of this is Andy Reid going, okay, I got a little bit too wild and crazy with the pass game. I understand now. I got to go back to what works. And Mahomes is coming off a torn ACL. I'm going to run the ball more, at least in the beginning of the season. Like how much do you look at this season in the offseason go, okay, Andy's going back to the basics.
I think you just got to look at how much better can we make our passing game through the running game. The Chiefs faced the most amount of light boxes of any team in the NFL this year, blank, and they were not able to take advantage of that at all. Teams do not fear or respect their run game. They do not care. You want to role play action, the linebackers, they're not even going to hesitate. They're just going to keep moving back. Kenneth Walker is a guy who can like feast on those light boxes. You look at what the Chiefs offensive line is and where their strength is on the interior. I mean, you can make an argument that Kenneth Walker is coming to a better offensive line than he was with Seattle. And yes, I know Gray Zabel's good, and I know the tackles are good, but they have the best center guard tandem in the NFL, or pretty darn close to it. So I think that like Kenneth Walker is going to specialize in chunk gains, and he does have a boomer bust element to his game. But I think that this is partially making life easier on Patrick Mahomes. Like Mahomes was just asked to do so much these last couple of years because of how ineffective the running game was. I mean, the Chiefs were like dead last in the NFL in explosive running back carries. Mahomes was the running game, the explosive running game, his scrambling. So I think this is a way where you start making your passing offense better because of taking advantage of those light boxes, where eventually teams are going to be like, look, we cannot keep taking the beating here. I still don't suspect that we're going to see, a 50-50 split of pass run for the Chiefs. It's still going to be their offense. And I think that there are some concerns about how are they going to use Kenneth Walker? Because Kenneth Walker is best from under center. He's best in, more of a traditional zone gaps scheme, not the RPO heavy offense that the Chiefs have done. So again, like they're betting on Andy Reid being able to get more out of this player and Andy Reid fixing the offense. Hopefully the extra time off this year will help them be better. But I think that this is just about getting singles and doubles for Mahomes. Where like, hey, he can just turn around, hand the ball off, and boom, they get a first down. That's not something they've had much of lately.
I know Andy is very loyal, so I get why he kept these guys after through all these years. This year, though, you and I talked about Eric Bieniemy is back, DeMarco Murray is in there, Chad O'Shea, and they are more, let's say, gruffer with players. They will scream, they will yell, they'll get on you if you're not trying. Does that give you more hope that this offense will be tougher, more efficient? Because I hate to say it, but the adults are now in charge of the room. There's no more sort of nicer people. It's we're going to get back to the old school. I'm going to ream your ass out if you don't do your job.
Yeah, I mean that is what they were telling you, that they needed someone who was going to hold players accountable. I mean, there's been some interesting clips from Worthy and Rasheed on like Instagram or TikTok Live or whatever, where they've been like, yeah, man, we're not gonna have as much time this offseason because we're gonna actually have wide receiver meetings. I mean, the peripherals there were just not great. Again, Andy Reid hired those guys, so like that's part of it. But the Chiefs kind of like soft fired Matt Nagy. Like at first it was like, oh, he's gonna get the Titans job, and then they hire Eric Bieniemy before Matt Nagy ever gets that job, and then Matt Nagy's out looking for a job after have hired Eric Bieniemy, and then he eventually lands in New York. So yeah, I mean, I think that they're saying that they think that some toughness, some guys getting on their asses is really going to be the difference here. And again, like they're betting on Andy being able to fix these things. And hopefully I think if we're being optimistic, just like how putrid the running game was, that if they can simply improve that will be the space that they need. The question is the scheme going to become an advantage again? Because right now, I don't feel that it is. If the scheme can become an advantage again, then you've got plus players like Walker. Obviously, Kelsey is still a good, a top 10 tight end. He's not that, perennial all pro now. And then you still have Mahomes and Rice and Worthy. That's where it feels like the victory could be won in the margins.
Is this scheme a problem though, or as you said? I mean, and I hate picking on coaches because their job is not easy. But will the scheme be better just because you have guys like Bieniemy, guys like O'Shea, guys like Murray who will get on you? So all of a sudden, as you said, me and I get it. The players are supposed to be professionals, but sometimes they're not. They're still young adults. Will the scheme simply be better because again? You'll have guys demand accountability, go, okay, you don't do this, I will get on your ass and we'll replace you.
Yeah, I certainly think so. I do think that there is a chance that it can be because there were a lot of players who were not doing what they were supposed to, that weren't finishing routes, that weren't running the cleanest routes. So I do think that some accountability there can make a difference. I'm not super optimistic, but Andy Reid has evolved before, and hopefully this extra time will allow him to.
All right, before we let you go, we got to talk. I know you're already working on
Hey,
the
hey, man,
2027
I
NFL draft. So before we let you go, final question here, because I know you're busy, so we won't have too much of your time. But how much are you scouting? What are you looking at from a quarterback class? And I know everybody's already going 2027. Let's crack open a bottle, best draft class ever. So, what are your thoughts prematurely before you dive deep into it and watch the tape?
Yeah, I think the exciting thing is like there's a lot of names at quarterback, and traditionally we've seen over the last couple of years that even after, whoever is the consensus top quarterback going into the year, a lot of times there's guys we're not talking about, like a Mendoza, like a Cam Ward, that end up rising up. So, quarterback class is very exciting. The skill players, whether it be Cam Coleman, Jeremiah Smith, obviously is God in cleats, and there's some edge rushers, there's some really talented tackles. I think the amount of names that could be first round picks is what makes the class exciting because there's a lot of upside left there. So it's exciting. I'm going to take a peek at the 2027 class here very soon.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, we love having him on the show because we got to let him go because he has plenty to do. But check him out once again. I give you Arrowhead Addict, draft analyst, Chiefs insider, and all around football guru. I give you Price Carter. So, Price, once again, where can fans check you out at? Where is the Twitter, the Instagram? You probably have now like a Substack you're working on. Where can they check out your work at Arrowhead Addict? Where can fans hit you up at?
Yeah, at Price A Carter on Twitter is where you can find all my work, and Arrowhead Addict on Sports Radio 810 WHB here in Kansas City.
Price Carter, ladies and gentlemen, once again, always honor pleasure to have you on the show. We come back. We got a lot more going on here, only on it's Last Call. Last Call, the alcohol, only on the lastcallpodcast.com.